Alright, this is number 6 in the Prager Rational Bible. Alright, let's get started. Verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, 2. Speak to the Israelites and say to them, If anyone, man or woman, explicitly utters a Nazarite's vow, set himself apart for the Lord. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Essay. An essay here, the Nazirite. So the majority of this chapter deals with the laws of the Nazirite, an individual who takes a vow to act in a particularly holy manner for a particular period of time, generally 30 days or longer. And this person seeks to get closer to God by becoming in some ways like a priest. As no Israelite could join the priesthood, the Israelite priesthood is hereditary. Becoming a Nazirite was the closest a non-priest could become a priest. And Rabbi Joseph Hertz, a former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, in his widely read commentary on the Torah, notes, the Nazirite vow was often taken by men and women alike purely for personal reasons, such as thanksgiving for recovery from an illness or for the birth of a child. And Josephus Flavius, the first century Jewish historian, records that Bernice, the sister of the Judean King Agrippa, took a Nazirite vow in thanksgiving whenever she recovered from an illness. And when the Torah usually uses the word man to refer both women to men and women, woman is added here to emphasize that a woman could become a Nazirite. And the verse makes it clear that this vow can be taken by both sexes. Women are as interested in holiness as men. And the word translated here as set himself apart, Nazir, it comes from the same root as Nazarite. So the word therefore means one who sets himself apart. To be set apart is what holiness is about. And the Hebrew word for holy, kadosh, means both holy and separate. See the commentary at Leviticus 19:2. Yeah, but he doesn't have that one out yet. And the Nazirite sets himself apart and becomes consecrated to God. That is, holy to God. And the reason the Torah prescribes exactly what a Nazirite must abstain from is to set limits on the Nazirite's abstinations. And the Torah does not leave it to the individual to decide how he or she will become, as it were, holier, because some people will go to extremes amounting to self-punishment. And for discussion of this issue, see the essay, God Wants Us to Enjoy Life, at Deuteronomy 8:10. You can check that out in the Deuteronomy 8 video. Going back. And the Nazirite is required to abstain from these 3 behaviors. As Ronald Allen explains it, quote, the person who makes pledges for a particular time of special devotion to the Lord as a Nazir had to face 3 demanding limitations. 1. Absolute abstinence from all produce of the vine. 2. Total forswearing of trimming of and likely caring all for the hair. And 3. Utter separation from contamination by any contact with a dead body. And thus these 3 areas of life were regulated for the Nazirite during the period of the vow. Diet, ordinary pleasure; appearance, ordinary care; and associations, ordinary obligation. End of the quote. It's important to point out that staying away from sexual relations is not one of these abstentions. Yeah, abstentions. There you go. Here you go. Abstentions. I guess it's easy. Incumbent upon a Nazarite, and most people assume abstention from sex is a part of a decision to assume a holier calling. And both lifelong and temporary monks in Catholicism and Buddhism, for example, abstain from sex. And the widely revered Hindu leader Mohandas or Mahatma Gandhi, at the turn of 36, took a vow of purity which included chastity. And this meant he and his wife had no sexual relations for the remaining 38 years of her life. And the Torah differs for two important reasons. First, the Torah does not regard sex as in any way unholy. Of course not. God created it for marriage. There is unholy sex, non-marital, of course, and also when it is coerced, rape. But sex is not unholy in and of itself. Second, while the Nazarite must abstain from some personal pleasures, the Nazarite may not deprive others, especially his or her spouse, of pleasure. And Judaism and Christianity deems it a sin to deliberately deprive one's husband or wife of sexual intimacy. Sex was created for marriage. Again, the first, abstention. All right, verse 3. He shall abstain from any wine or any other intoxicant. He shall not drink vinegar of the wine or of any other intoxicant. Neither shall he drink anything in which grapes have been steeped, nor eat grapes fresh or dried. All right, 4. And throughout his term as a Nazarite, he must not eat anything that is obtained from the grapevine, even seeds or skin. So the first abstention is drinking any intoxicating beverages and the consumption of anything made from grapes. Now it's clear why intoxicants are forbidden. And these substances are associated with drunkenness, leading to a loss of self-control, which would be the antithesis of holy behavior. In this regard, the Nazarite resembles the priest, who is under a similar restriction. However, the Nazarite is forbidden to drink alcohol at any time throughout the duration of his vow, while the priest must abstain from alcohol only when preparing to enter the sanctuary. Further, unlike the Nazarite, priests are not forbidden non-alcoholic grape products. And given that alcoholic intoxicants are forbidden to the Nazarite, it should be obvious why wine is forbidden. As Rashi comments, quote, he sets himself apart from wine for the sake of heaven, end of quote. But why the Nazarite is forbidden to consume any part of the grape or any other product of grapes is not clear. At least regarding grape juice, perhaps it was to guarantee that its consumption would not escalate into drinking wine. In Hebrew, the blessing over both wine and grape juice is the same. All right, and then the second abstention. 5. Throughout the term of his vow as a Nazarite, no razor shall touch his head. It shall be consecrated until the completion of his term as a Nazarite of the Lord. It shall remain consecrated until the completion of his term as a Nazarite of the Lord. The hair of his head being left to grow untrimmed. So the second behavior from which the Nazarite must abstain is cutting, including trimming his or her hair. Oh, man. Untrimmed hair served as the identifying sign of the Nazarite. And of course, the most famous biblical Nazarite is Samson. though unlike the Nazarite discussed here, Samson was a rare lifelong Nazarite. Yeah, well, he was even set apart to be a Nazarite before he was born. But sadly, he doesn't obey it. And his untrimmed hair was the source of his superhuman strength. And when the Philistine seductress Delilah discovered the source of his strength, she betrayed Samson for a monetary reward and informed the Philistine authorities who had cut Samson's hair while he was asleep. Well, she had one of her servants do it, but anyway, Samson immediately lost his strength ultimately. And as with intoxicants and wine, the Nazarite prohibitions went further than priestly prohibitions. And unlike the Nazarite, the priest was not allowed to trim. The priest was not only allowed to trim his hair, he was obligated to do it so regularly so that it would not grow wild. So the priest could actually trim his hair. Yeah. But Nazarite, could not. The third abstention. It's hard to say that word. Verse 6. Throughout the term that he is set apart for the Lord, he shall not go in where there is a dead person. Even his mother or father, or even if his mother or father or his brother or sister should die, he must not defile himself for them, since the hair is set apart since the hair set apart for his God is upon his head. So with this third restriction, the Nazarite again resembled the priest, but not entirely. Priests were forbidden to come near the dead, but they were permitted to do so for an immediate relative. Only the high priest was forbidden to attend the funeral, even a member of his immediate family. Leviticus 21:11. And throughout his term as a Nazarite, he is consecrated to the Lord. When a Nazarite's vows are inadvertently broken. Verse 9. If a person suddenly dies near him, defiling his consecrated hair, he shall shave his head on the day he becomes clean, and he shall shave it on the 7th day. And on the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So turtle doves were the least expensive animal offerings. And according to Rabbi Shemaiah and the Talmud, the Torah allows the Nazarite to bring a poor man's inexpensive sacrifice as consideration for the one who made a vow with the best of intentions and then had to forfeit all that he had accomplished and begin again. And then, of course, I think even Jesus's earthly parents actually brought turtle doves to the temple after he was born. Alright, verse 11. And the priest shall offer one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering, and make expiation on his behalf for the guilt that he incurred through the corpse. So the Hebrew word translated here as guilt is ket, which is spelled C-H-E-T with the English letters, which always means sin, but ket can also mean failure or missing the mark, and therefore does not convey the moral opprobrium of the word sin. And the book of Judges speaks of a marksman who could sling a stone at the strand of hair and not miss. And in that verse, the word miss, yakati, comes from the same root as ket. And so, too, a Nazarite who, through no fault of his own, came into contact with the dead body, did not sin, but simply missed the target. Yep, the same day he shall reconsecrate his head, 12, and rededicate to the Lord his term as a Nazarite. He shall bring a lamb in its first year as a penalty offering. The previous period shall be void, since his consecrated hair was defiled. So if a Nazarite accidentally comes into contact with the human corpse, he becomes impure like any Israelite for 7 days. And on the 8th day, after he shaves his head and brings a sacrifice, he has to undertake the same vow again, regardless of how close he had come to completing his term. And in this regard, the Nazarite is again on a higher holiness level than the priest. And a priest who was rendered impure by virtue of coming into contact with the corpse undergoes only a 7-day ritual of purification and does not have to bring any sacrifices. And also in discussing this law, the Mishnah records the case of Queen Helena, a convert to Judaism who took a vow to become a Nazarite for 7 years. And near the end of this period, she accidentally became impure and had to begin all over again. And the Torah demands that we affirm life, and therefore contact with the dead is a source of impurity. The holier a person was, the more life-oriented he had to be. Thus, whereas an ordinary Israelite would become contaminated by a corpse only through direct contact or by being under the same roof, the Nazarite's holiness was such that he could contact impurity even at a distance, and that distance is not specified. Alright, when the Nazarite period ends, verses 13 through 21. Alright, this is the ritual for the Nazarite. On the day that his term as a Nazarite is completed, he shall be brought to the entrance of the tent of meeting. Alright, got another essay here. Another essay? Yeah, it's not too bad. Alright, this essay, the Torah's negative view of aestheticism. Alright, verse 14. As his offering to the Lord, he shall present one male lamb in its first year without blemish. For a burnt offering, one ewe lamb in its first year without blemish. For a sin offering, one ram without blemish. For an offering of well-being. For peace offering. Alright. And the observant reader will notice something odd. The Nazarite has successfully completed his vow, but yet he's still commanded to bring a sin offering. Why? Why would that be? Now, before answering, I should note Professors Guadalupe's, understanding of this sacrifice. Though called katat, which is almost universally assumed to come from the word ket, he maintains that the word katat does not come from the same verb to sin, lakato, but from the verb lakati, which denotes purification or purgation. And he notes that there are many instances of katat in the Torah that have nothing to do with sin. And one example is the large amount of katat sacrifices on festivals, such as, and there shall be one goat for your katat offering to make expiation in your behalf, Numbers 28:22. And there are many other examples in the Torah that do not apply to a deliberate or specific sin. But nevertheless, both expiation and purgation are about wrongdoing. And the Oxford Dictionary defines expiation as the act of making amends or reparation for guilt or wrongdoing, atonement. And the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines purgation as clearing of guilt. And so while the Katat sacrifice is not a sacrifice for a specific deliberate sin, it does relate to something wrong or impure. And as regards the Nazarites bringing a Katat offering after completing his time as a Nazarite, nearly all scholars, religious and secular, maintain this atonement for returning to living a less holy life. And then here's this guy Milgram, Jacob Milgram, citing this other person, Nachmanides, however you say that. Quote, his self-removal from the sacred to the profane realm requires sacrificial expiation. And there is another view, however, that I find more compelling. The individual who lived the life of a Nazarite despite the holiness that he achieved sinned. God and the Torah do not want the Jew to deprive himself more than is necessary. Life is to be enjoyed. Asceticism is not a Torah ideal. And this is how the Talmud puts it. Rabbi Samuel says, whoever indulges in voluntary fasting is called a sinner. One who denies himself the enjoyment of wine is called a sinner. And all the more so one who denies himself the enjoyment of the pleasures of life. And whether or not this understanding of the sacrifice is brought at the end of the Nazarites' period of self-denial is correct, and I believe it is, whether or not this understanding of the sacrifice is correct. It is clear that the Torah considers denying oneself permitted joys is a sin. And both the Torah and later Judaism would want the Jew to enjoy the pleasures of the world. Happiness is a mitzvah, which is Hebrew for commandment. It's an insult to God not to enjoy the world that he created. In fact, according to the rabbis, one will be judged by God for not having enjoyed life. So a person will have to give a reckoning and an account for everything his eyes saw and did not eat. Okay. Alright. And of course, enjoying the world does not mean doing whatever one wants. Judaism is opposed to hedonism as it's opposed to asceticism. And, there are rules governing all aspects of one's life. Above all, Judaism commands us to live life fully engaged in the world while striving for holiness in everything that we do. And the possible sin of the Nazarite is not only that he has denied himself permitted pleasures, but also his failure to achieve holiness through moderation. And the Jerusalem Talmud reacts to one who, like the Nazarite, forbids things permitted by the Torah in this way. Quote, it is not enough for you to observe what the Torah has forbidden, but you wish to forbid yourself more things. And besides, even in the New Testament, I think in Colossians 2, even asceticism is prohibited. Because it's not really being holy. Really, it's still about yourself, which is not being holy. Anyway. And yet, even though one might be on some, and even though it might be on some level a sin to become a Nazarite, the Torah recognizes that some people feel the need to at least temporarily withdraw from the pleasures of the world. And it therefore prescribes laws and rituals to enable a person to do so within clear limits. So the Torah limits asceticism as much as it limits hedonism. Yeah. And I wonder if that quote from Paul could apply, all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. Yeah. And then, of course, you're free to do things that are not prohibited in Scripture, but of course, if you can't do something with the clear conscience, it is sin. Anyway. But of course, you don't want to, add all different rules to the word. You don't want to do that, obviously. Alright, verse 15. A basket of unleavened cakes, of choice flour with oil mixed in, and unleavened wafers spread with oil, and the proper meal offerings and libations. Libations, I guess that's how you say it. And the priest shall present them before the Lord, and offer the sin offering and the burnt offering, and he shall offer the ram as a sacrifice of well-being to the Lord, together with the basket of unleavened cakes, and the priest shall also offer the meal offerings and the libations. And then the Nazirite shall then shave his consecrated hair at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and take the locks of his consecrated hair and put them on the fire that is under the sacrifice of well-being. And then the priest shall take the shoulder of the ram when it has been boiled, and one unleavened cake from the basket, and one unleavened wafer, and place them on the hands of the Nazirite after he has shaved his consecrated hair. And then the priest shall elevate them as an elevation offering before the Lord, and this shall be a sacred donation for the priest, in addition to the beast of the evening, of the elevation offering, and the thigh of the guilt offering. And after that, the Nazirite may drink wine. And such is the obligation of a Nazirite, except that he who vows an offering to the Lord of what he can afford beyond his Nazirite requirements must do exactly according to the vow that he has made beyond his obligation as a Nazirite. Okay. And then you get to the famous priestly blessing. All right, verse 22. And the Lord spoke to Moses, "Speak to Aaron and his sons. Thus you shall bless the people of Israel, and say to them, the Lord bless you and protect you. The Lord deal kindly and graciously with you, and the Lord bestow his favor upon you and grant you peace." Alright, so verses 24 through 26 consist of the text of the famous three-lined blessing offered by the priest. In the words of Dennis T. Olson, quote, the words of Numbers 6:22 through 27 are perhaps the most well-known of the entire book of Numbers. And then Jacob Milgram notes several literary patterns in these verses. 1. The three lines rise from 3 to 5 7 words in the Hebrew. And the number of consonants rises from 15 to 20 to 25 in the Hebrew. And the first half of each line describes the movement of God towards his people, and the second half describes God's activity on their behalf. And the divine source of blessing is made evident by the citing of God's name in each of the three lines as the second word. And the Hebrew word for you is written throughout in the singular. The people are thus blessed individually rather than collectively, a reminder that although the Israelite is a part of a people, each individual has a relationship with God. Yeah, ultimately by faith, not by works. And to this day, this blessing plays an important role in Jewish life, and during synagogue services, priests, Kohanim, I guess that's the Hebrew there. The priests go before the congregation and call out this blessing. And according to Jewish tradition, the members of the congregation, do not look at priests while they recite the blessing, as God's glory is assumed to be manifest at the time, and one is to look away. When reciting the blessing, the priests remove their shoes, as did their ancestors in the temple, a practice that harkens back to God's instruction to Moses at the revelation of the burning bush. Remove the sandals from your feet, from the place on which you stand is holy ground. Exodus 3:5. And moreover, this blessing is not recited only by priests. Rabbis often recite this blessing at the end of the service. And many parents offer this blessing to their children at the beginning of the Sabbath. In fact, this blessing is invoked in the liturgy of all the Bible-based faiths. A fascinating detail about the priestly benediction is related by Rabbi Jonathan Stacks. It says this: in 1979, a group of archaeologists was exploring an ancient burial site southwest of the old city of Jerusalem. And at first, the caverns and burial chambers seemed to be bereft of objects of interest. But a persistent 13-year-old boy helping the team discovered that beneath the floor of the caves was a hidden chamber, and there the group found 2 shiny silver scrolls no more than an inch long, and they were so fragile that it took 3 years to work out a way of unrolling them without causing them to disintegrate. And these scrolls turned out to contain a number of passages. Among them, the priestly benediction is recorded there. And these scrolls have been scientifically dated to the early 6th century BC, the time of Jeremiah the prophet, and just prior to the destruction of the first temple, by Babylon. And this document is therefore hundreds of years older than the Dead Sea Scrolls, long regarded as the most ancient surviving biblical texts. Wow. And Sachs concludes this: there is something almost poetic in the fact that there's something almost poetic in the fact that it should have been this text that survived. It should have been this text that survived. It is almost the oldest of our prayers, and yet we recite it daily, and it's used by parents when they bless their children on Friday night. All right. And then peace in verse 26 refers to both a lack of conflict and inner peace. And the latter is attainable when we feel God's presence in our life. And then verse 27, for thus they shall link my name with the people of Israel, and I will bless them. And the priest utters the divine name, but it is God who activates the blessing. The priest possesses no divine powers. All right, well, that's actually the end of chapter 6. And Lord willing, I guess I'll get to chapter 7 next time. There'll probably be some longer videos, because 7 is a pretty long chapter. I don't know. But Lord willing, I'll get there. But until then, may God bless you, and the grace and mercy won by Jesus, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all.